All right, peace family, welcome back to the channel. In this one, I want to go over Osceola and the narrative surrounding him. I want to prove that Osceola was a black revolutionary, and not only that, he aligned himself with black people. So we're going to start with an 1839 anti-slavery almanac. It says the nation robbing an Indian chief of his wife. When monarchical Spain governed Florida, many slaves fled there from their Republican oppression and found shelter. One of them, having married an Indian chief, their freeborn daughter became the wife of Osceola. She was seized as a slave in 1835 by a person who probably never seen her, holding the claims of her mother's former master. So this anti-slavery almanac is showing what was going on in Florida at the time. These slave catchers, slave traders came into Florida claiming ownership over Osceola's black wife, saying that her mother was a runaway. So they're not even trying to get the mother, they're trying to get a descendant who they never seen before. So this is giving Osceola firsthand knowledge of the terrorism that black people in Florida was facing. But it says in 1836, the Negro wife of Osceola, a Seminole chief of Indian and Negro descent, was seized as a slave. Osceola, in revenge, ambushed, killed, and scalped U.S. General Thompson and three other white men. Thus began the Second Seminole War. Osceola says J.R. Giddens visited Fort King in company with his wife and a few friends for the purpose of trading. Mr. Thompson, the agent, was present, and while engaged in business, the wife of Osceola was seized as a slave. Evidently having Negro blood in her veins, the law pronounced her a slave, and as no other person could show title to her, the pirate who had gotten her body was supposed, of course, to be the owner. So it says Osceola became frantic with rage. From that moment when the outrage was committed, the Florida War might be regarded as commenced. So this is from 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro by J.A. Rogers. So what it's showing is when Osceola's black wife was kidnapped, it started the Second Seminole War. So the First Seminole War was started with the destruction of the Negro Fort by Andrew Jackson. The Second Seminole War is started when Osceola, who was a Seminole chief of Indian and Negro blood, according to J.A. Rogers, when his black wife was kidnapped, this started the Second Seminole War. So the Second Seminole War was about the Indian removal, but it shows that it was really sparked off when they started messing with, when they messed with the wife of Osceola. So we got two lunch points to show that the Seminole Wars, at least the first two, were black wars, especially the one against slavery and relocation. And so this is a depiction of Osceola being arrested. They're taking his wife and they like holding him back because he kind of went on he was outraged, so he went on a rampage. Look back, more on Lauderdale's pursuit of warrior chief Osceola. So I want to give more detail on his origin. Osceola was a man with mixed heritage. He was part Creek Indian, part African American, and part Scots Irish. And this is, they saying Major Lauderdale was also Scots Irish, who the author is trying to tie in with Osceola. But if we look at, he was part Creek or part Native American, they say his dad, if we go by one story, they say that his dad was Scots Irish. He was a trader, like a fur trader, and his name was Powell. So you will see Osceola with the English name Powell as a last name. Some people say that that was just his adopted stepfather. So if we're going by that was his real father, a white man, we can see that the Creek African American blood would have came from his mother. So his mother could have just been black, but they're saying that he's part Creek and part African American because, you know, they always try to play those games. But let's say that they don't know who his father is, and this is his story. So his mother is the black one, and that's who you descend from. It's a matrilineal society amongst these natives. So that's what he would have been. But I just wanted to give you a little background on Osceola. And so when we find depictions of him, we'll also see that sometimes they paint him as a dark man. Most of the time they paint him as a red man because they don't want you to be tied in with him. He's basically a mulatto, but we're going to get into who he allied himself with. William Lloyd Garrison, the famous abolitionist, indicating his awareness, highly unique at the time of the nature of events in Florida in a letter to George Thompson. The numerous Indian tribes on our southern and western borders are up in arms, carrying death and desolation in their train, and are not only defined but absolutely outgeneraling the United States troops. They have ravaged many plantations, killed many inhabitants, and emancipated a considerable number of slaves. Osceola, their chief, is a warrior who may be considered the boldest, bravest, and most sagacious since the days of King Philip of New England. So they're telling us that they're ravaging many plantations and emancipated a considerable number of slaves. And it goes to say that Osceola is his chief. So Osceola has a married to a black wife, has a black mother, and now we see that he's leading campaigns against plantations in the area and emancipating a considerable number of slaves. This is what Osceola is doing. That's why I say he's a black revolutionary. So let's get into this one. Osceola put himself at the head of the opposition to the surrender of runaway Negroes. So this is called Osceola and the Negroes, and for the most part, we already been through this. All the blacks in the Seminole tribe, they say 4/5. I showed y'all that in the previous video that they're saying that four out of every five, basically, Negroes that you found amongst the Seminoles were runaway slaves, even though it's you can't prove it. It's unsubstantiated. You can't prove this. Just like with Osceola, his wife, they just snatched her up. They don't know who her people was. And just like Osceola's mother, who's black, they don't know how she got into that tribe, though. But let's get into it. So he put himself at the opposition. When Hadjo announced to the council that runaway Negroes should be returned, Osceola, rising in rage, declared that as long as he was in the nation, it should never be done. Osceola was moved both by public and personal consideration. He had never accepted the agreement of March 1837 and therefore opposed any action which would deprive the tribe of warriors or workers. Osceola, moreover, who was not a Seminole chief but a red stick from Georgia, had no hereditary claim to leadership. His land consisted of warriors who were without close ties to the hereditary leaders and who were attracted by his personal qualities of militancy, courage, and intelligence. Negroes, the element most strongly opposed to removal with the loosest allegiances to the hereditary chiefs, were naturally most susceptible to Osceola's appeal. His early personal following especially, therefore, was recruited in good part from amongst the Negroes. It also included hot-headed Miccosukes. So they saying that Osceola's earliest following, his earliest one, was amongst Negroes. And it also told people that the Negroes were the most active in fighting against being removed to the West because this was their homeland. Most of these people that they put above the tribe were either mixed people who was mixed with these traders and Europeans who was coming amongst the tribes, and there was also foreign tribes to Florida. So they really had no dog in the fight. They was riding the coattail of these revolutionary blacks. And so when a white man pulled them over and sent them somewhere else, these people became the head of the tribe. That's why they allied with the Confederacy, which we find later in the Civil War. And they enslaved blacks, re-enslaved blacks, and took away their land rights. This is what they did. But Osceola wasn't with that nonsense. But early in July 1837, Osceola was surprised and his band disrupted. He himself escaped with only 3 warriors. At his headquarters at the time of the disaster was a Negro village in a Panasufki swamp. Of the 55 prisoners captured from his band, only 3 were so-called Indians. So only 3 of the 55 are the red man type Indians, and the 52 others would have been supposedly these Negroid type Indians. So that's less than 5% of Osceola's band was red Indians. So even if the people that he was out with, when they were surprised, I mean the ones that escaped with him, even if these people were not Negroes, which looking at the numbers they have to be, his band was made up majority of Negroes. Osceola was thus confronted with the necessity of building up his band again from the beginning, and runaway Negroes, such as the defiant fugitives of Cedar Creek, were the most promising candidates. So when he built up his after his band was destructed, and he built up another one, look what he found himself amongst again. So I'm showing you that his wife, black, mother, black, allies, black. And he's going to the plantation. So his cause at that time was a black cause. So let's go to the next one. It's still from Osceola and the Negroes. So Osceola was seized shortly after, and his Negroes presumably either surrendered or attached themselves to another chief. So the story about the enslavement of Osceola's part Negro wife is probably untrue. So this is what they are saying. What he is saying, even though I showed you an anti-slavery almanac earlier, it was like I wanted to beat him to the punch. But his importance as a Seminole war chief was partly as the commander of Negro warriors, and it is well substantiated by contemporary documents. So he's saying that we can go through the documents and find out that Osceola was a commander of Negro warriors. And this is the thing that they can't get away from. So if it's a fact that he was a commander of Negro warriors, why every time they show Osceola, he's always surrounded by these red men? Where is that even coming from? Osceola was in the trenches with the Black Seminoles. But on October 21st, 1837, Osceola and 81 of his followers were captured by General Joseph Hernandez on the orders of General Thomas Jessup under a white flag of truce. When they went for peace talks to Fort Peyton near St. Augustine, he was initially imprisoned at Fort Merriam in St. Augustine before being transferred to Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Islands outside of Charleston, South Carolina. Osceola's capture by deceit caused a national uproar. General Jessup's treacherous act and the administration were condemned by many congressional leaders and vilified by the international press. Jessup suffered a loss of reputation that lasted for the rest of his life. His betrayal of the truce flag has been described as one of the most disgraceful acts in American military history. And it's funny that the author would take that point because General Jessup actually got the Seminoles captured twice under a false truce flag. Like he put it up, told them to come in, and when they came in, he captured them. And that's why the second time he did it, the amount decreased. The first time he got a good amount of leadership, like Osceola, John Horace, Wildcat, and them guys. But the second time he wasn't able to do it because the Seminoles was like distrustful of him. So we talked about Osceola getting captured, and this is from the Sun Sentinel, but it's Bring Me the Head of Osceola. Osceola was already a dying man when he boarded the SS Poinsett bound for a prison cell at Fort Moultrie, Charleston, South Carolina. As the ship sailed away from St. Augustine, the great Seminole warrior looked back for the last time at the Florida he loved. So it says, before the burial, however, Dr. Wheaton suddenly plunged into the twilight zone. He cut off Osceola's head. Later, he used it to punish his small sons when they misbehaved. He would hang the head from their bed instead when they slept. The head was subsequently given to the doctor's son-in-law, continuing the weirdness. He sent it to the founder of New York University's medical school and the New York Academy of Medicine. The head was lost during the fire of 1866. And I find it very interesting that in the year 1866, his head was lost in a fire, because 1866 is the same year that the 5 civilized tribes got their treaties of 1866. And in these treaties, the Seminoles being a party to, in these treaties, all of the rights of natives was given to the blacks that was being enslaved by these tribes and the free blacks that was already in those tribes prior to slavery and during slavery. But this is when they get rights. So it ended everything that the Confederate Seminoles tried to do, because see, this would happen. The blacks was the warriors who was fighting the most. They had better land, better crops, and better cattle. So when the Civil War happened, you had the red Seminoles try to come in and take what the black people had and enslave them. So when the Treaty of 1866 came, it basically supposedly gave these blacks equal rights in the tribe, even though they still fighting, just like black people still trying to fight to get into the United States integration. But this is what I'm saying about Osceola, though. Osceola, black, had a black cause, had black allies around him, surrounding himself with blacks, and his mother was black. But when we see this man being depicted, they don't depict him as such, and it's outrageous, because it's like they can pick and choose people's races now, because it's their definition of the one drop rule, not my definition, but their definition of the one drop rule is who is black and who is not. But since Osceola name is so loud amongst the Seminoles, they don't really want to use him with their one drop rule. They try to like avoid that. But back to this last thing about Osceola head getting cut off. The Europeans seem to have a fixation on when revolutionaries was getting killed to take their heads off. Like Nat Turner. I think Nat Turner's skull was still floating around until a couple of years ago. So we had Osceola, who suffered the same fate. They took this man's head. He was messing with his kids with it, and then he gave it to doctors on the head, in the heads of medical schools and academies. But I just wanted to bring this back. Osceola was a black revolutionary. We should teach of him as such. But this is a free